This is a First Coast News weather update, tracking Hurricane Dorian.
Good evening. I'm Heather Crawford with this update on Hurricane Dorian. And don't worry, you're not going to miss any of the football game. Now tonight, Dorian is an extremely dangerous Category 5 hurricane. We're going to have the latest track from storm expert Tim Deegan in just a moment. But first, this storm made landfall this afternoon in the northern Bahamas with winds at 185 miles an hour. Some gusts at 220 miles an hour. The storm has caused widespread damage and left behind flooding in that area. Now, at this hour, mandatory evacuations have been ordered for parts of the First Coast starting at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. In Duval County, that includes Zone A and B. In St. Johns County, also Zone A and B. And in Nassau County, Zone A, C, and F will be under mandatory evacuation orders starting at 8 tomorrow morning. If you don't know which zone you're in, you can plug in your address into a link you'll find on the main story at firstcoastnews.com. Now let's get the latest track on Dorian with meteorologist Tim Deegan. And Tim, as you've been saying all day today, miles really matter.
They do indeed, Heather. And here is the hurricane, obviously, and the eye. If there's any positive news at all, it's at least the central pressure. Remember, the lower the pressure, the higher the winds. The pressure has leveled off, but we're still talking about the strongest hurricane ever recorded in the Bahamas, still with winds of 180, gusts to 220. Where is it going to go? Well, sometimes, folks, hindsight is 20/20. So what the weather team has done here is place the position of where the eye has been. Basically, we call this westerly motion. Notice some wobbling going along. When we have more time, we'll talk about why that wobble occurs. But maybe even something we call sinusoidal motion. West-northwest, west-southwest, overall averaging out a westerly motion if you're making a forecast. Now, that, of course, is of great concern down south and over central Florida, although how long this turn takes and eventually heads up our way is significant for us here on the First Coast. I'm talking about northeast Florida and southeastern Georgia. We're going to talk more about this in detail in a moment. But for many of you that went through Matthew, knowing how Matthew compares to Dorian's future forecast track might help you make some decisions. Blake?
Yeah, that's right. First off, we want to go over the warnings that are currently in effect for the state of Florida. Starting off here, you'll notice the pink. That is a hurricane watch from the Flagler-Volusia County line down towards the Brevard-Volusia County line. So it is a small area, but significant nonetheless. And that hurricane warning picks up from the Space Coast all the way down through Martin and Port Lucie, St. Lucie County is what I'm trying to say. Here's a look at the storm surge watch and the storm surge warning you can see here for Central Florida getting up towards Daytona Beach. Here is a look at the probability of hurricane force winds. We're talking about 42% chance there towards Melbourne getting into the Wednesday, Thursday time frame. And look at this, heading up through the First Coast, giving us here in Jacksonville about a 9% chance of seeing some of those hurricane force winds. Here's a little closer look at this the First Coast. A 20% chance there in St. Augustine, 28% towards Palm Coast. The bottom line is there is a chance, which is why we're going to have to watch this very closely. More significantly, of course, and what we continue to drive home is that even if the eye wall stays offshore, we are still looking at the possibility of tropical storm force winds moving through much of the region. We're giving that about a 46% chance down there towards St. Augustine. So those of you along A1A to the beach, this is where the primary area of concern is going to be. The further inland you are, the less chance you have of seeing that. Now take a look at the power outages once again. Possible in the yellows, scattered out towards the orange, likely even becoming a little bit of widespread out there towards the Space Coast. Now take a look at some hurricane history. Dora, of course, the big one in 1964, the only hurricane of note to affect the First Coast. Again, that was Dora in 64. We had Floyd in 1999, Matthew in 2016, and this is the one that we're going to be watching very carefully. Irma, of course, caused a lot of damage here in Jacksonville as well, but there is the cone for Dorian. Tim, following very closely the path of Matthew. So again, if you did okay in Matthew, you're likely going to do okay in Dorian, but that forecast still very uncertain. We're going to have to watch this one very closely.
Indeed. Thank you, Blake. So let's slow it down and let's talk about the fact why miles matter. So this is the forecast position of the eye. About 48 miles is all off the coast, but at least that would keep the catastrophic event off the coast. What about just plain the hurricane force winds? Well, at this time, that is as we head toward Wednesday, with the eye at this position, of course, that is very iffy. We expect hurricane force conditions to extend to the west about 40 miles. think of that as the eye wall. So for now, we're forecasting the eye wall to be offshore, but you can do the math. We're talking about single digits, folks, as far as sustained hurricane force winds. We mention that because I know many of you have been wondering, why are we being asked to evacuate? Because the average error about 2.5 days out is nearly 100 miles, and we're talking about a single digit margin of error as far as at least sustained hurricane force winds, even if the catastrophic does stay offshore. Let's break it down for you for Duval and all of the other counties, knowing and we're hoping that you will come back and check out the updates. And if you can't check us out here, don't forget, we have the First Coast News app. So if you suddenly are woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning from the kids or from the dog or whatever, and you want to check out the latest and go back to sleep, you can do that. And I'm talking 24/7 until this hurricane is through. For now, in Duval, on the islands, okay, winds gusting to 75 miles per hour, and the storm surge, probably one of our greater concerns right now, 4 to 7 feet, because that's a developed push. That's developed motion in the ocean that is just plain heading our way on the islands, and at least up until 7 feet. The greater concern, not oceanfront, but for those of you on the intercoastal and the estuaries. At this point, we don't think the St. Johns River from downtown south will be a big deal. A forecast of 2 to 3 feet, but we're going to watch that very closely. Okay, for St. John's and Flagler, again, going for that 4 to 7 foot surge, and that's why we're concerned about you folks in St. Augustine. Somewhat oceanfront, but again, on the estuaries for all those places up and down Flagler County. Out on the river, though, at least right now, we're thinking just 2 to 3 feet. That would not be a problem. Up north we go. Nassau, Camden, Brunswick, or Glenn County. So places like Amelia, Fernandina, St. Mary's, on up to, yes, Brunswick. You're on the estuary, so we're concerned about you. And then also the Golden Isles. Gust to 75 and possibly a 7-foot storm surge. What about Putnam and Clay, where we're just talking about the St. Johns River? As long as the eye wall stays offshore, we're talking about 2 to 3 feet high, but that wouldn't quite be to the problem level. But again, that's going to be close, so please keep a close watch on the forecast. Now, farther off to the west, if this goes anywhere near forecast, you're the place to be, folks. In fact, when you consider it summer, these winds might actually feel good. Talking about Baker, Union, Bradford, and Columbia, and then also in around the Okefenokee counties of Ware, Charlton, Brantley, and Pierce. Don't forget, we will have an update for you at 10. That is us looking at the latest computer models, interpreting them for you, and then the latest from the National Hurricane Center, and this will be with a new updated cone of concern. That'll be at 11 p.m. And it's just not just me. We have a great team. Everyone's
Absolutely.
looking at all the different angles, and that helps tremendously. And we'll keep this updates
We appreciate
coming.
all that you're
Thanks.
doing and the whole team. Thanks, Tim. Well, starting at midnight, Mayor Lenny Curry has declared a local state of emergency in Jacksonville. So this allows local officials access to more resources. Shelters in Duval County, including several that are pet friendly, will open tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. And if you plan on staying at a special needs shelter, the city does want you to pre-register. You can do that by calling 630-CITY. And we have been getting in a long list of school closures. Among those school closures, Duval County Public Schools. It will be closed Tuesday and Wednesday, as will public schools in St. Johns County, Clay County, and Nassau County. And our team coverage of this storm continues tonight at 11. You can tag along as our storm expert, Lauren Routenkrantz, takes flight with the hurricane hunters as Dorian makes its way toward Florida. She flew right into the eye of the storm, and she'll be sharing her journey on air tonight at 11. And that coverage will also continue on firstcoastnews.com. And you can get the latest on Hurricane Dorian anytime online, firstcoastnews.com. There you'll find the latest track, breaking headlines, evacuation orders, and how to find which evacuation zone you're in. And we're counting on you to help us tell the story. So if you can safely do so, we'd love for you to share your photos and your videos of the storm's impact. You can share those with us using the hashtag FCNStorm. And we, of course, will have the latest for you tonight on First Coast News at 11. For now, we'll return you back to the second half of your game.
This has been a First Coast News Hurricane Update. Stay safe and informed. Download the First Coast News app today.